Then a preamble to the Bill of Rights itself. Remember, they had actually passed the Constitution, but there were states that would not ratify it. And so it says the conventions of a number of the states having, at the time of their adopting a Constitution, expressed a desire, and what is a desire? In order to prevent misconstruction or abuse of its powers, that further declaratory and restrictive clauses should be added, and as exceeding the ground of public confidence in the government will best ensure the beneficent ends of its institution. So they saw that if we left the Constitution without spelling out certain rights, that they would be misconstrued and that they would abuse the power given to the government. Exactly what we're dealing with today. So they knew that when they went ahead and came up with the amendments to the first 10 amendments to the Constitution. It's only been amended another 16 times since then. And ironically, the last one, the one that restricts when Congress can get its pay raises, was actually one that they proposed initially. There were two they proposed, actually proposed 12, not 10, and the first one was exactly that. The Congress could not vote itself a pay raise. It would not take effect until after the next congressional election. So that way you had a chance to kick them out for voting for it in the first place. So they wouldn't get to realize it because they'd be gone. So they actually proposed that initially. It's the last amendment we have to our Constitution is that particular one. Now the rest of the preamble to the Declaration has some interesting things in it. It says, we go on after securing the rights, it says that whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it and to institute a new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. So the power was still with the people. When a government becomes abusive, the people have the right to alter that government or to abolish it completely. The fact that our Constitution lasted 233 years is unique in the world. Most countries have had some kind of revolution, some kind of overthrow of their Constitution at least every 30 years. France, after World War II, went through 27 constitutions in a matter of about 16 or 17 years. The longest government they had lasted 9 months. So there's something about ours that made it a living document. It doesn't have to keep being changed. And they provided for changes. They provided for changes that would require it to be thought out. It requires a sufficient vote of the Congress and of the people in order for it to be changed. So we're not radically changing it at the will of the people. We've got people trying to do that by executive order now and trying to bypass the Constitution, or having the Supreme Court make decisions that have nothing to do with the Constitution. And that sort of started with the Warren Court. Warren was one of the first Supreme Court justices who had no experience as an attorney at all. He was just a politician. And up to that point, they were reluctant to ever rule on constitutionality if they could avoid it at all. Since then, everything is an issue whether it's constitutional or not. So we go on in the preamble of the Declaration of Independence. Prudence indeed will dictate that governments long established should not be changed for light and transient causes. And accordingly, all experience has shown that mankind are more disposed to suffer while evils are sufferable than to right themselves by abolishing the forms to which they are accustomed. So in other words, basically, people will suffer for a while. They won't just upset the government at any whim. But when a long train of abuses and usurpations, that's the taking of power by the government or the people in government, pursuing invariably the same object, evinces a design to reduce them under absolute despotism, it is their right, it is their duty to throw off such government and to provide new gods for their future security. So that's the preamble to the Declaration of Independence. This is why they were doing it. And they said, we are tolerant, but we've gone beyond toleration. Now, the first 10 amendments, when we talked about the right of property and liberty, life, liberty, and happiness. And so what did they put in those first articles? What did they adopt and why? How did they tie into what they said were the inalienable rights given by God? The First Amendment, which is the one that's constantly being battled every day, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. They always talk about the establishment. They always talk about separation of church and state. They never talk about prohibiting the free exercise thereof. And right now, the church is so under attack, it's incredible for what they are arresting pastors for, what IRS is going after people for, which is prohibiting the free exercise of religion. One pastor actually was hauled into court, charged criminally for ringing his bell of his church because they had a noise ordinance in that community, and the bell violated the noise ordinance. One took out a full-page ad supporting a candidate, which you're not supposed to do that. IRS goes after people because of the Johnson Amendment. Lyndon Johnson, when he was a congressman, was afraid of getting defeated in elections, so he passed the Johnson Amendment, which is the one that prohibits you from endorsing candidates if you're in the public sector. And of course, they spread that to churches as well, and they constantly threaten to take 501c3 status away from churches if they openly support candidates or anything of political speech. However, it's sort of interesting. That's never been tested in court. The IRS will usually back down if you really stand up, but most people get panicked and they back off. One case actually went to court, and the court said, okay, IRS has the right to withhold that 501c3 status, but it doesn't mean anything. You can apply for it again in 2 years. There's nothing that says they can keep that from you. There's nothing that says you can't hold yourself out as a non-profit organization, as a church, without that status. In fact, they don't even need 501c3 status. 504 covers churches. So it's not really necessary, but churches get panicked and they back off. One church in California, in Pasadena, they harassed them for 18 months with audits and all of that, and the guy just hung tough, and eventually the IRS said, we've closed our file. So, they scare you, but they really have no authority to do what they're doing. But we are going to have this year, the American Defense Fund, the lawyers who represent churches in this situation are actually going to set up a situation on September 26th. They're going to ask some of us to actually give speeches that will clearly, as far as IRS is concerned, will violate their rules, just to get it to court, if at all possible, and see if they really will, or get the Johnson Amendment thrown out permanently by the courts. So it was obviously, you have the freedom of religion, free exercise thereof. Separation of church and state had absolutely nothing to do. It's not in the Constitution. It's nowhere there. What they didn't want, establishment of a federal religion, which England had. Each state had their own right to determine what churches they would have, and actually, with the exception of Pennsylvania and Rhode Island, other states already had basically state churches. New Jersey was Presbyterian, Massachusetts was Congregational, and most of the states had local churches that the people, not only did they support that particular denomination, actually taxed people to support the church. Even here in New Hampshire, you had to belong to the local church, and you actually paid a tax that went to support the church. So this idea of separation of church and state is absolute nonsense. It isn't what was intended at all. And also, this applies also to the federal government, not to the states. They get, later on, they say, well, we incorporate all this, we apply it to the states as well. That was never the intention. The Second Amendment, which they challenge all the time. We just had, Washington, D.C. had a gun law that was overturned by the D.C. Circuit and said you have a right personally to keep and bear arms. They said, of course, the amendment says a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state. The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Notice it's the security of a free state, not of the federal government. Their concern was if the federal government is going to run a military and we don't have the right to have control of our own state, then we'll be right back where we started from. Because contrary to what we hear, Paul Revere did not say the British are coming. Who else was going to be coming? He said the regulars are coming. That's what he really said. He didn't say the British are coming. Who else had the military? Who else was in control? So he said the regulars are coming. So we didn't want the federal government to have the total military power to overtake the states. We wanted the right to keep and bear arms because that's who actually defended us initially at Lexington and Concord. There was the individuals with their weapons, including ministers, who also were officers of the military. Some went on to be generals in the Army, despite the fact they were ordained ministers. The Third Amendment was obviously to keep them from putting troops in your house. It said, no soldier shall in time of peace be quartered in any house without the consent of the owner, nor in time of war, but in a manner prescribed by law. So even in time of war, they can't say, when declare martial law, you're going to have troops stay in your house. No. It has to be, again, with the consent of the governed.